All right, let's move on to stuff I like. I want to do, instead of just recommending stuff this week, I really did get off in this thought yesterday. We were talking about Borges and talking about this idea that we're in a crisis of ideas, and conservatism has to, even if we come back in the future with a new conservatism, it is going to be different simply because of the time that it's in. It's not going to be 1950s. The 1950s are not coming back. Nothing comes back. Everything changes. The change continues all the time. Edmund Burke talked about this, that you want to change in keeping with your traditions. You want to change in keeping with the things that are essentially and always true. But we have deviated from the path. There's no question about it. And what I want to just point out is this deviation has been going on for centuries. And there are one of two ways this can go. The reason I'm returning to something I used to talk about it when the show began. I guess it's almost 2 years now since the show began. In Jeremy Boring, the God King of the Daily Wire, we started in his pool house, broadcasting out of his pool house. Now we have these fabulous studios and all this, but we started just doing it with a mic in his pool house. And at that time, I talked a lot about Hamlet. And Hamlet is really interesting. I believe that Hamlet is Shakespeare's reaction to the Reformation. People always say that Shakespeare was not a religious writer. I don't believe that at all. I've done whole shows about how I think he was a religious writer. But it doesn't make any sense that a writer of Shakespeare's genius was living during the time of this Reformation, where people were being burned at the stake for their beliefs and people were being killed and arrested for reading the Bible in their native language and stuff like that. It doesn't make sense that he wouldn't write about that wouldn't inform the way he thinks. And one of the things, Hamlet is the story of a man, it's based on another play called Hamlet, in which a guy is told his father's ghost comes and says, I was murdered, you have to avenge my murder, and Hamlet goes and avenges his murder. We don't have that play, but we know that's what it was about. Shakespeare writes a play in which the ghost comes to Hamlet and says, you have to avenge my murder, and Hamlet goes, well, how do I know that this is really a ghost? How do I know that this was really murder? How do I know that this was what I'm supposed to? He can't make up his mind. Well, why? What happened? And one of the things about Hamlet is he goes to school in Wittenberg in Germany. Even though the play takes place before the Reformation, it takes place in some dark, backward time, Shakespeare never cared about that. He never cared about anachronism. And he goes to school in Wittenberg, which is where the Reformation began. It's where Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses up on the cathedral door. So I believe that this is Shakespeare saying this play is about what happens when the monopoly on truth that is owned by the church, when the authority of absolute truth that we had in the church disappears. What happens? How do you make up your mind? How do you know it's true? Now you're just living out of your own head. How can you know where the truth lies? And in this famous speech, this is Mel Gibson, in a great movie, he cut a 4-hour play down to an hour and a half, and it really works, and it's one of the best Hamlet's performances I've ever seen. Mel Gibson talks about the fact that his mood changes everything. The very nature of the world seems to change with his mood. So here's this speech.
I have of late, but wherefore I know not, lost all my mirth, forgone all custom of exercises. And indeed it goes so heavily with my disposition that this goodly frame, the earth, seems to me a sterile promontory. This most excellent canopy, the air, look you. This brave o'erhanging firmament. This majestical roof fretted with golden fire. Why, it appeareth nothing to me but a foul and pestilent congregation of vapors. What a piece of work is a man. How noble in reason. How infinite in faculties. In form and moving, how express and admirable. In action, how like an angel. In apprehension, how like a god. The beauty of the world, the paragon of animals. And yet to me, what is this quintessence of dust? Man delights not me. No. Nor woman neither, though by your smiling, you seem to say so.
Shakespeare always throws in a dirty joke if he can get in a dirty joke. So he says, man delights not me, and the guy laughs saying, yes, but you like women, don't you? So Hamlet is saying that the entire world, the sky, the world, mankind himself, seems to be at the mercy, the very nature of him seems to be at the mercy of his moods. And when he's depressed, suddenly man, who seems to be an angel, looks like nothing but dust. That's not quite what that statement means, but for now, that's fine. The sky is no longer beautiful. The earth is no longer beautiful. How then do you know the truth? How then do you know what's right and wrong? How then do you know that what you think is right is not just your anger? If we don't have a church that is going to tell us these things, how do you know? And this idea that Shakespeare saw coming from so far away. In Hamlet, there are hints of postmodernism. There's hints of, deconstructionism, all kinds of things. He just saw into the future, really all the future. He saw everything that was going to happen. He reasoned it out. And that's what I believe the play is about. And that's why I think it's so great. And at the same time this was happening, a scientific revolution started to take place. And in that scientific revolution, man and man's perceptions began to be disproved. It seemed like the earth stood still, or that the earth was at the center of things. It seemed like the sun moved around the earth. Turned out, nope, it was the earth moving around the sun. That was the Copernican revolution. That was why Galileo and the church got into it over this. That's not actually entirely why, but it doesn't matter. The thing is, it was changing where man was. The only truth that you could count on was the truth that you could measure, was science's truth. And the idea was basically that man's perceptions now were unreliable, and the only real truth was physical truth, measurable truth, the distances between things. And the soul got relegated to this kind of ghostly place. This was Descartes. It was Descartes who said this, who talked about basically the soul. He turned the soul into a ghost in the machine. Those are not Descartes' words, but what somebody said. And that's what we've been fighting about. We fight about whether there's a ghost in the machine. Of course there's not a ghost in the machine. People before the scientific revolution did not think that's what the soul was. They thought the soul was the nature of being alive. It was the very fact of what you were when you were alive. And so you could have a soul, but it didn't have to be some ghostly thing. Anyway, the scientific revolution was so successful that this idea took hold, even though it makes no sense. And what I have been arguing is that the sense that it doesn't make is now coming to an end. The fact that we are now saying things, people are sitting there going, well, we don't really exist. We have no self. We have no free will. We're going to learn every piece of machinery that makes every decision for us. All these things are untrue, and they are going to be disproved, but they are being disproved as we speak. The very nature of reality has suddenly become connected to the observer in quantum physics and things. The logic of the scientific revolution that took place back in Shakespeare's time is falling apart. And the logic of there not being a moral reality, a spiritual reality, is also, I believe, falling apart. But as we rediscover that reality, I do not believe we're going to go back to 13th, 14th, 15th century theology. I don't believe that's going to happen. And what we have to be talking about is just what we were talking about earlier on. What is the good of man in the modern world? What does sin look like in the modern world? What is right and wrong? And who is going to decide, and how can we decide, and how does the reason of guys like Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas, how does it apply to the new world?